Pete Holmes is Seattle's city attorney, a sponsor of Initiative 502. Steve Sarich is a user of medical marijuana, and he's with the No on 502 campaign. Mr. Holmes, let me begin with you. I'm hearing a lot of prosecutors making this argument that prohibition hasn't worked with marijuana. Is that the main reason why we should consider legalizing it? Is that a good reason?
That is the main reason. It has failed to achieve any legitimate public safety goal, and so we want to bring a new approach, if you will.
So are we just simply giving up on it?
No, not at all. Instead of simply giving up, we're actually substituting a comprehensive regulatory program that is modeled the way we regulate hard alcohol.
Mr. Sarich, I understand that you believe in legalization. You just oppose this particular initiative, right? What issue do you have with this initiative?
Well, two. First of all, it doesn't legalize anything. In order to legalize something, you must remove all the laws that made it illegal in the first place, and this does not remove one law from the Washington state codes that makes it illegal. Instead, it adds a new and much more heinous prohibition, prohibition that came directly from the drug czar. It's his new strategy for prohibition.
It does allow you, however, to possess up to an ounce, right?
Well, assuming that there would ever be these stores, correct.
You don't think there will be these stores?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
We call it the unicorn and fairy dust theory, that every 13-year-old girl is going to get a unicorn and an ounce of fairy dust under this law. It's right after the part that says the feds are not going to come in and raid us for selling 187,000 pounds of marijuana in the state of Washington, like they have in Colorado. They've already raided 57 dispensaries. 29 dispensaries have been shut down in Washington in the last month.
Well, to that point, obviously this initiative would not change federal law. So what should we expect? The feds have sent a number of warning shots over the marijuana dispensaries in our state. Are we just itching for a showdown here with the federal government? And are these things that you lay out in your initiative really going to happen? Retail stores, regulation of processing and producing?
Well, I do want to counter some of the things that Mr. Sarich has said, the typical scare tactics. Number one, 30 days after passage, it will be legal for adults to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana in the state of Washington. And 95% of the law enforcement efforts are by local and state law enforcement officers. So it is a meaningful change. I-502 was crafted, however, to avoid conflict with federal law. So it is not preempted. There is no positive conflict in that private entrepreneurs will be licensed by the State Liquor Control Board to grow, process, and sell marijuana
which is still illegal in the federal government's eyes, right?
And so is medical marijuana, for that matter.
I mean, should we expect that? I mean, are we putting the state in the situation of taxing and regulating a substance that the federal government says is illegal?
Which is exactly what we do with medical marijuana today. We have collected in the last year $750,000 in taxes from medical marijuana providers, and there has been no interference from the federal government.
This initiative sets up a specific crime of driving under the influence of marijuana, and it sets a standard of 5 nanograms. Mr. Sarich, you have an issue with this, I understand. Is it not fair to say if the state is going to legalize marijuana, we don't want a bunch of people driving around who are under the influence?
Well, no, this is a per se limit. This is assuming that you could ever judge impairment by blood content, and all the studies in the world show that you cannot judge impairment by blood content on anything besides alcohol. What this will mean for people like me, I'm a medical cannabis patient, I will always be over the limit for impairment. And for those under 21, it's really heinous because it applies to both to anyone, whether you're a patient or not. If you're under 21, it's a zero tolerance policy.
Mr. Sarich keeps making these accusations and these claims, and there's no way to test them. And, you know, if he would like to sit in a controlled environment, wait for a number of hours after he's last imbibed marijuana, and then test his blood the same way that we test alcohol, and see if he is at the 502 limits, that might be a meaningful argument. But so far, we just have to take Mr. Sarich's word for this.
I've had my blood tested when I first woke up in the morning. I was 4 to 5 times the legal limit.
Again, we have to take his word for it.
Is there scientific evidence, are there scientific studies that set this 5 nanogram limit? I mean, can you tell Mr. Sarich exactly that, you know, once he's had medical marijuana, he has to wait X number of hours for it to get through his system?
You bet.
Is it like alcohol?
Sure, Robert. We have studies posted at the website newapproachwa.org, and I urge everyone to go see. The science is posted there. Contrary to Mr. Sarich's statement, all the studies in the world. In fact, the most compelling peer-reviewed scientific evidence that we have shows that at the 5 nanogram per milliliter of whole blood level, that's where impairment for most subjects occurs. And that's what we're going after. We're going after impaired driving.
And to his point there, how much time must elapse after using marijuana?
It does depend on the amount consumed, of course, but 2 to 4 hours.
2 to 4 hours. Do you, I mean, obviously, how do you address this? If you want marijuana legalized, how do you address this point that they're obviously trying to address here, which is you don't want a number of people going around impaired? How would you test for this?
Well, first of all, per se limits have no relationship to impairment. Per se limits only relate to finding an illegal drug in your system. The latest study from the National Institute on Drug Abuse says that THC and carboxy-THC, both will stay in your system for up to 30 days, which means I will never have THC out of my system, and neither will any patient under the age of 21. And it means that if you're under 21 and you're a 20-year-old college student and you smoke a joint on Saturday, 2 weeks later, that THC is still in your system.
Untrue.
Okay,
here's the study.
Mr. Sarich, Mr. Holmes, I need to take a break. When we come back, we will add 2 more people to this table who have some expertise in marijuana treatment. Up next, if voters legalize marijuana, would there be an impact on kids, their access, and their likelihood to experiment? That angle when we come back.
The issues that matter. You're watching King 5 News Up Front with Robert Mack.
Should marijuana be legalized? I-502 would allow possession for anyone over 21, but would that have some impact on kids? We're back with Seattle City Attorney Pete Holmes, a sponsor of I-502, and Steve Sarich, an opponent. Also joining us now, Roger Ruffman. He's a professor emeritus at the UW School of Social Work and also a sponsor of the bill, and Derek Franklin with the Washington Association of Substance Abuse and Violence Prevention. Mr. Franklin, let me begin with you. If marijuana were legalized in Washington State, what do you think would happen, especially with kids?
Well, I think use rates would increase dramatically. I think anytime we increase availability of a substance, we're going to see an increased use, and we'll see that with kids and adults. So I think it will have a significant impact on the health and safety of kids across the state.
Mr. Ruffman, does that make sense? If you increase availability and accessibility, that you would see usage go up?
We're already failing our young people under current law. Recent study compared American youth with youth in 36 European countries. And our young people were the most likely to say that marijuana is readily available. They were the least likely to say that marijuana can be harmful. And those numbers are really of concern.
So given that, I mean, if you make it more accessible, wouldn't it make sense that more kids would experiment, that they'd have access to it?
Robert, I think the question really is not accessible, or the level of accessibility, because we're already at a ceiling effect. Our communities are flooded with marijuana. The question is, can we change norms about what's acceptable behavior and what's responsible behavior, and change norms about what is responsible and necessary for young people? And I think that the way the initiative has been crafted is designed to do just that.
Mr. Franklin, why not treat marijuana in the same way as society treats alcohol?
Well, if you look at access in Washington State, youth report that marijuana and alcohol are about as easy to get as one another. But in fact, fewer teens use marijuana. The fact that marijuana is illegal is one of the major reasons kids say that they don't use.
I'd like to ask a fundamental question about the initiative, which it goes as far as to allowing people to possess marijuana, but not to grow marijuana. Why that distinction?
Because we want to control the product, the processing, and the sales. And you have to do that from beginning to end, if you will. So that's why, for instance, unlike the other 2 states that currently have initiatives on the ballot, Washington is focused at only sales to adults 21 and over. Because I believe that that is the appropriate focus for government, not to criminalize adult private behavior, but instead to focus on youth access and impaired driving.
Mr. Sarich, what do you think is going to happen? People who perhaps grow marijuana currently, do you think they might give up growing marijuana? It might be too much trouble. They can just go to a retail store.
Not a chance. That's just not going to happen. They are taxing, assuming the stores happen, which I don't believe they will, they're going to tax it at 25% 3 different times and then 10% at the end, and they believe that somehow this is going to eliminate a black market, when still people under 21 will not be able to go to these stores and buy marijuana. Do you think they're just going to stop smoking marijuana? No. So there are still going to be drug dealers selling to kids, so that doesn't solve that problem either.
You're going to have this tax at every level, Mr. Holmes. Is the price going to be so high that people just are, it's going to be prohibitive for people to go and purchase this?
It is key that the initiative undercut the black market. And so that's one of the reasons that we've entrusted the State Liquor Control Board with the ability to make regulations and, in effect, to be responsive to what market conditions are. The one important fact, though, is that we've had an independent analysis, Robert, from OFM, the Office of Financial Management, and it assumed a very competitive price with taxes, and that's the number that they used that showed that we would generate over $500 million in state revenues at a very competitive price.
Mr. Franklin, if we have so many stores around and availability is increased, in some way, is it possible that it takes away the novelty of something that is currently illegal?
It's possible,
especially for kids.
Yeah, it's but the idea of social norms and what kids think about a drug is so tied to what they see adults using. We're going to see adult use increase. We're legalizing a substance that medical users, adult users, recreational users will be giving kids examples of what they can model their behavior after.
Ms. Ruffin, do you acknowledge that adult use might go up? That there might be more marijuana in homes, and if it's in homes, that kids might be more likely to try it?
I think in the long run, we're going to learn how to live more healthfully and responsibly with marijuana than we are now. And I think what will happen, there may be an increase in adult use for a while after this becomes regulated and legalized. But I think that the norms about what's responsible behavior ultimately in the long run have a much greater chance of taking hold and our society being more healthy and safer with a regulated market, in part because of what the initiative is going to do, Robert. It's going to allocate a substantial amount of money to public education about marijuana. Today, young people and adults are woefully misinformed about marijuana, including marijuana's harms. It's going to put in place science-based prevention programs targeting young people, and it's going to adequately fund treatment and research. Our state is going to have an infusion of resources to deal with marijuana harms that will provide us an essential public health approach, an alternative to criminalizing.
Mr. Search, I want to go back to you because what you're saying is you don't think this initiative goes far enough, that marijuana should be legalized, period. You think they're putting too many restrictions on it. So what is your solution? You think it should be available, that people should be able to grow it, that there should be no penalties whatsoever?
If what you're going to do is legalize it, you need to legalize it. That way you can stave off federal intervention. But this is not legalization. Again, what we're going to do to our kids under 21 is impose an even stiffer penalty on them. They're going to have a per se zero tolerance drug law.
That's what we say with alcohol, though, right?
Well, but zero tolerance, if they are not impaired, we're going to throw kids in jail. I mean, and ruin their futures. They're not going to be able to get a job. They're going to lose their Pell Grants for college. This is a heinous thing to do to our young people. This kind of heinous punishment for a non-crime is exactly the earmark of prohibition that we're supposed to get rid of.
And yet, if you shoot this down, do you think this issue is going to be revisited, that voters might go further in the future?
Absolutely.
Mr. Holmes, how is this going to work? In other words, if a police officer is driving down the road and suspects that someone is impaired and it's not alcohol, are they going to ask you to submit to a blood test?
The Fourth Amendment, as I like to say, is not repealed by I-502. I think everyone is familiar with the .08 blood alcohol standard that we currently use to measure impairment in DUI circumstances. But the circumstances in which the 5 nanogram limit would apply are, first, you would have to provide, you have to give a law enforcement officer probable cause to believe that you're driving impaired. That means erratic driving. And these are things that the officer is going to have to articulate before he or she can pull you over. So that's the first step. That doesn't change under 502.
At some point, though, you would have to consent to a blood test, I would assume.
Well, there's the implied consent laws are also remain intact. No, what happens next is at that point, an officer then would have to make the additional step of stating a belief that you're impaired by something other than alcohol. And at that point, you can be ordered to submit to a blood test.
Okay, Mr. Saris, let me ask you, if you're against this kind of monitoring on driving, under your scenario, if you were to legalize marijuana, how would you avoid the scenario where a lot of people might be under the influence of marijuana and driving? How would you test for that? What would your
test be? It's very simple. We already have the test now. We are already arresting people for impairment on our state highways? Is that somehow not working? This is not a test for impairment. This is just showing that you have an illegal drug in your system. It has no relationship to
But how would you measure it?
And measure impairment? How do they measure impairment now? I'm not a state patrol officer, but certainly they're arresting people for driving under the influence of drugs today.
Okay, Mr. Franklin, Mr. Sarich, Mr. Holmes, Mr. Rothman, thank you all very much. We will be right back.